In 1977, two laser physicists published an account of their research at the Stanford Research Institute in California. Harold Puthoff is a laser patent holder, like his colleague Russell Targ, and they've made an intensive study of the third major psychic faculty, clairvoyance. The ability to perceive things hidden or at a distance. They called it remote viewing.
For the past 10 years, we've been investigating a phenomenon called remote viewing. In this experimental series, which has been carried on now with hundreds of subjects in the laboratory, we found that many individuals are able to accurately describe what's going on in distant locations, blocked from any kind of ordinary perception.
Stanford Research Institute is a major scientific establishment that handles hundreds of private and government research projects a year. Targ and Puthoff began their first formal experiments in 1973 with a psychic, Pat Price. Typically, they were done like this. While Targ remained with Price in the laboratory, Puthoff left with a colleague for a nearby location without, naturally, telling Targ or Price where he was going. At a prearranged time, Price tried to locate him. The electrically shielded cage guarded against radio contact, and an impartial witness was always present. The Price experiments are among the most challenging in the whole history of psychic research, so we are reconstructing them in some detail, drawing on the records and transcripts of the original experiments. Pat Price, who was a bluff, no-nonsense police commissioner, died in 1975.
What kind of place do you experience them at? What do they seem to be doing at their location?
An actor speaks his words.
Well, they seem to be high up in a tower. I keep flashing on Coit Tower. I see there's red roofs, tile floor and roof. Now they're walking through colonnades. It seems to me this it's a building, a separate building by itself, a library, a museum of some kind. Could this be Hoover Tower at the Stanford campus?
It was. Puthoff had indeed gone to the top of the Hoover Tower. Below him were the red roofs and red tiles as described by Price. Price had also correctly identified colonnades and the fact that the tower contained a museum and library. But could it have just been a lucky guess? Was there a flaw in the experimental procedure? The Hoover Tower target site had been selected from one of 60 possible locations locked away in the laboratory director's office. A mini-computer had been used to generate a random number indicating the envelope to be chosen. In another experiment, the target chosen was a local marshland nature reserve.
I get this image of crosshairs, looking at crosshairs. Well, getting closer, it's more like an intersection. I get the feeling of a botanical area with crosswalks, very geometrically laid out.
A direct hit, but notice the catwalks can only be seen as crosshairs from the air. Another target site, swimming pools.
I get the impression of a water treatment plant. It looks like water storage tanks. There's a service road down here.
Price sometimes drew what he saw.
Chain link fence.
We were surprised at the accuracy that Price was able to generate in his transcripts. In one of the cases where the target was a swimming pool complex, he actually described the dimensions of the pools to within 10% of their physical size. When he looked at the various sites he was able to describe for us, It was as though he came zooming in from thousands of feet in altitude, scanned the Bay Area until he found the people at the target site, and then described what they were looking at. It was not as though he was reading their mind, because frequently he would describe items at the site that the outbound experimenters hadn't even seen.
For the fourth experiment, the laboratory director took matters into his own hands. Wondering if there might be some hidden flaw in the procedure, or indeed outright fraud, he drove out of SRI with put-off, with deliberately no idea of his final destination. He decided to head west. But after 5 minutes, suddenly changed his mind and went in the opposite direction. And then kept on changing direction at random. He finally ended up about 5 miles up the coast at an out-of-the-way marina.
Can you tell me what you're experiencing with regard to where our outbound experimenters have gone?
What I was seeing is a boat dock or a jetty. It's about in that direction from here. Yes. A lot of little boats, motor launches, sailboats. Some of the sails are furled. Boat dock or jetty. It's funny. Someone flashed in. Chinese or Japanese pagoda-like effect.
Does that pagoda effect have anything to do with the boat dock that you saw initially? Is that near where they're standing?
It's behind them. It's like a restaurant. Highly manicured lawn. Where the hell would that be?
The building was indeed a restaurant. That summer, Price did 9 remote viewings in all. Targ and Puthoff then had all the data independently assessed. A scientist totally unconnected with the project went to each of the 9 target sites, armed with transcripts of all the experiments. He was asked to read each transcript and then judge which of the 9 sites most closely corresponded to the various descriptions Price had given. It was a final, completely objective test of whether Price really had been as psychic as he seemed. The results confirmed just how accurate Price had been. Out of the 9 sites that he'd remotely viewed, no fewer than 7 of his descriptions were clear enough for the judge to correctly match them to the actual site.
I'm flattered and honored.
Russell Targ has a more unorthodox response to his critics.
Well, there's of course no way to deal with people who don't want to know. By and large, the critics who've been interested enough in our work to come to our laboratory, we have asked them to take part in experiments and experience remote viewing themselves. We'll sit them down, have someone go and hide in the Bay Area, and then with a lot of preparation on their part, we will be able to elicit a remote viewing description from them, which is often very accurate indeed. And the activity of experiencing successful psychic functioning has been a substantial motivation to skeptical people changing their mind.
Sympathetic scientists at SRI tried first. This tennis court was the target, and this is what was drawn. a drawing by another scientist. He described a building 40 feet high with a symbol on the wall. The target was a windmill 5 miles away. A totally skeptical scientist made these drawings. The target was a merry-go-round. How does Targ get ordinary people to do it?
We spend a lot of energy getting their agreement that it's permissible and expected for them to succeed. We think it's important in dealing with viewers, especially inexperienced viewers, that we portray psychic functioning as an ordinary and desirable and useful mental ability.
But in science, the key test of an experimental finding is whether it can be replicated. Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher is a theoretical physicist who has also investigated remote viewing. She's done 8 full-scale studies and replicated the SRI findings in 6 of them, sometimes over very long distances. One of her subjects tried to describe where someone was 2,000 miles away in New Orleans.
Circular patterns and rings and discs, as if looking down on them from the top. It looks like a large saucer just sitting in the middle of a city.
The person was here, at the Superdome. Remote viewing has even been tried across the Atlantic. Marilyn Schlitz, at 26, is one of the youngest of today's parapsychologists. In 1979, she published her first successful replication of remote viewing with 24 students as the viewers, and then decided to have a go herself. At noon every day for 10 days, she tried to find a friend of hers in Rome. He visited a different place each day, chosen at random. How on earth do you find someone nearly 5,000 miles away?
You give yourself a signal. You tell yourself what you're looking for, a very specific task. I'm looking for the target site, not any other of the zillion things there are in the world. The first time I personally tried to do it, the kinds of impressions I got were very similar to what I'd had like in a daydream. They were very faint, and it required effort to bring those faint impressions into a form that could be recognized and could be articulated.
Her 10 viewings were independently judged and 6 were spot on, Rome Airport being a particularly striking hit. So, has remote viewing been proved?
If a number of people in different laboratories can get these results, then you have to start really giving it some credibility. We've done a review. 2 colleagues and myself have done a review of the remote viewing work and have found that out of 28 formal remote viewing studies that have been published, over half have been reported as statistically significant. And these are in various laboratories across the United States. I feel at this point that we have very strong evidence to support the remote viewing hypothesis.
For many parapsychologists, the question is no longer, does remote viewing exist, but how does it work? Hella Hamid is a professional photographer and also a successful remote viewer. In a series of 10 experiments at Stanford Research Institute, she was asked to look inside a sealed canister from 200 yards away. To assess the limits of remote viewing, they wanted to discover how small an object the viewers could see. Hella Hamid was right 7 times. In one experiment, she made this drawing and said her strongest image was like a belt. Inside the can was this leather belt keyring. In another experiment, she described a long, thin, silver-colored object with a nail head at the end. The hidden target was a bobbin and pin. If there are no limits on land, what about under the sea? Seawater is an excellent shield for virtually all electromagnetic radiation. Would it interfere with remote viewing? Apparently not. Even at 500 feet down and 500 miles from the target, the viewer correctly described an enclosed space with a pool, large doors, and people walking around. The target was a shopping centre with an indoor pool. But although the mechanisms of remote viewing are currently inexplicable, Targ isn't worried.
We don't feel that